Hello and welcome to those of you who are joining us. My name is Melissa Garland. I'm the VP for Client Development for AtlasRTX. We've been hosting a series of webinars over the past couple of months talking to the home builder community about changes and issues, and we're making a little bit of a shift today. I get to step out of the questioning seat and I'm putting Bassam, our CEO, into the hot seat to lead a few different discussions that we're now calling executive chats. And today we're very excited to have Joel Shine, CEO of Woodside Homes, with us. Thank you for being here. And I'm just going to let Bassam tell you what we're going to talk about.
Fantastic. And let everybody know that we're all just a few feet from our masks. So we have been exercising social distancing, and we won't quite kiss, but we're far, and we've got our masks next to us.
Sorry, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I should just say, if anybody wants to ask any questions as we go along, please do feel free to put them into our chat screen here, right? And I will be happy to raise them with the gentleman in the room. So please feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So Joel, it's really fitting that you're our first executive chat guest, because you are our first, as you well know, our first client and our longest lived client for AtlasRTX. In fact, we've now passed our 4+ year mark, wow, which is pretty incredible. So we, Joel and I go back even before that, quite a few years, but I really thought it appropriate to have you as our first executive chat guest. So thank you for making the time. I know schedules are crazy, so thanks for dropping by our new headquarters. We call these our worldwide headquarters. What do you think?
I'm happy to do it. The headquarters looks great, and this is the first time I've been in anybody else's office since this all started.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted that you made the time. So let's start out with telling us a little bit about yourself, and there I want to go way back, where you were born and raised and what it was like growing up.
All right, nothing spectacular. I was born in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, sort of typical bedroom community area. Grew up, did my thing like all kids do and hung around. Went to college at UCLA and USC, then started my real estate career doing apartment buildings from my college dorm room with my roommate, and merged that into some home building stints, running the family business for a little while after that, and then starting an investment fund with CalPERS and various other things. And then in 2008, got hired on a quote 6-month and quote consulting contract to help the bankruptcy court figure out what to do with Woodside Homes, and we'll talk more about 2008 later. But and I've been there ever since. So just a home builder.
How did you go from college student to entrepreneur? How did that happen? Was that just in your blood? How did you?
I'd always had some sort of a business still going on. I ran a photography business from age 12 or 13 all through college. Partly to make money, partly to meet girls, depending on what was going on. Those priorities moved back and forth. But it was nice to have a little bit of cash. And my roommate's dad was coming out of a 1031 exchange and almost offhandedly said, hey, if you guys can figure out an apartment deal, I'll put up, a quarter of the money, you guys go raise the rest. And so we did, and did a 56-unit apartment building. We bought it, fixed it up, re-rented it, turned it around, sold it, and started doing a bunch more. And by the time I graduated college, we had about 6 apartments we were managing and running, and I no-showed for grad school.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. Although your answer reminded me of something that I think people would find interesting. You said what you did at 12 or 13. If you weren't running one of the largest companies in the country, what would you be doing?
I came very close to being a photographer, and at some point in my life, maybe I'll go back to that.
That's fantastic.
I actually went to Rochester Institute of Technology for 1 semester with a scholarship from Kodak, and went way far down the road.
Incredible. And instead you're in home building.
Instead I'm in home building.
Not exactly related.
Not close, no.
Let's go to 2008. Very memorable time frame for most of us. Probably only surpassed, and I'm going to be curious about your take, by what we're experiencing right now in our lifetimes. But please talk to us about 2008. Interesting from your perspective, being a home builder. sort of right in the heart of what happened in '08.
So it's interesting. When you asked me to do this and to compare '08 to the current recession, it was really the first time I'd gone through that mental exercise. So it was kind of fun. And your question was, how are they alike and how are they different or something like that in the email.
Yeah.
And there's a quote from, I think it's Tolstoy, that all miserable families all happy families are happy in the same way, but all miserable families are miserable in their own way. And I would say economies fall into the same category. A well-functioning economy with growth and everything else kind of always looks the same, but an economy that got messed up by something, they look very different. And the 2008 recession, in my opinion, has almost nothing in common with what we're going through right now. They're just completely different beasts. And especially from where I sit in the home building industry, easy contrast. So if you think about an economy changing gears, you sort of ask three questions, right? One, what caused it to change gears? Two, what was going on at the time? What was the environment that it changed gears in? And then three, how did people react? How did industry react? How did governments react? Things like that. So if you go to 2008, that recession was effectively caused by home building. To be more specific, it was really caused by the mortgage market, if you sort of drill down. But at the end of the day, the mortgage market was part of the home building market, so you could bulk them all out. And the precipitating event was the government letting Lehman go under, which set off a whole chain of events. At that time, the home building industry, if you go through sort of, obviously the precipitator of this one was a pandemic. Totally unrelated types of things, right? One's economic, one's health. And then you say, what was the state on the ground at the time? So in 2008, we were coming off of several years of wildly overbuilding. So if you go back Econ 101, supply was probably way in excess of demand all along because demand was being artificially created with liar loans and flippers and people speculating. Homes had become Dutch tulip bulbs, if you want to go back to that analogy. Fast forward to this time around, and our industry is, if we're not in balance, we're probably underbuilding, not overbuilding. I mean, we're still building way less than we were building back then. Even this year and next year, as things slow down a little bit, we'll still be way below, not even close to the peak of the last uptick. So you've got much less supply in the new home market. You've also, interestingly, got much less supply in the resale market, which is a very different scenario. And that's because that's being driven by health concerns, not economic concerns. Because frankly, who wants to be living in a house and have a bunch of strangers come trouncing through looking at your house while you're living in it? Mm-hmm. New homes, on the other hand, we can let two people into a model home remotely. Nobody else is in the house. They don't touch anything. We got cameras. They get a screening on the way in. We clean them regularly. So it both as a practical matter and as a perceptual matter, it's much safer to buy a new home than a resale home. What else? I'll give you a great data point. I just saw something. So right after the '08 downturn, the stock market went down and it stayed down by over 20% for 400 trading days. Wow. The downturn hit 20% here and was back over that within 17 days. Mm-hmm. So quite a difference in the way the equity markets reacted. 400 versus 17 days of down 20%. So I think it's very interesting to compare it. My bigger concern is that the speed and the number of job losses and the overall economic dislocation outside of home building and outside of the financial markets is actually wildly worse this time. In '08, Wall Street got creamed, but Main Street wasn't in the target like that. Now it's Wall Street's getting subsidies from the government. Every person's getting subsidies. Everybody's getting something from the government right now. But the number of small businesses that will not survive this is horrifying. I mean, just the loss of people's nest egg for these businesses they started, it's going to be awful. And so I think the U.S. economy is going to take a fair bit of time to crawl back from it. But what's interesting is while you could call housing the cause of the last downturn, housing could well be one of the leading industries to pull us out of this downturn because the housing market's doing surprisingly well.
Please talk to us about that. And I'd love to first focus in on housing and then go beyond that. But with 40 million as of this morning, I believe the number is roughly 40 million unemployed in the country, roughly a quarter of the country, of employable people in the country. How do we reconcile that with the stock market doing so well, with home builders candidly doing so well? Where is the disconnect?
Well, reconciling that with the stock market is undoable because you can't reconcile it. If you're being rational, you ought to buy stocks on some assumption of a forward trading price to earnings ratio and some rational valuation metric. And the PDEs are now too high, and they're even higher than they look because the earnings for most companies are going to be highly impacted for the next couple of years. So it's beyond my comprehension, but as a friend of mine used to say, remember, the stock market doesn't trade on economics, it trades on psychology. And so I have no idea why the stock market is so high. Home building, which I hopefully understand a little better than economics, which is a very low bar to get over because I have no idea I have no idea why the stock market's doing what it's doing. Home building holding up as well as it has actually been surprising to everybody. But part of what has happened is, again, it's all about playing supply and demand games. And while demand has obviously come down, because so many people in the resale market have simply not chosen to list their homes, the supply may have come down more than the demand. And in a normalized world, resales are 90%, new homes are 10%. So, a 10% or 20% contraction in resale inventory basically is enough to double the demand for new homes, if all else held equal. So I think that you're seeing a shift, although you're now starting to see the resale market come back. I also think, again, it's now psychology, not economics.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of people where something's wrong with your computer, by the way.
Okay.
There are an awful lot of people where one or both spouses are traditionally gone most of the time to work, and the kids are usually gone most or all the time at school. And the idea that everybody's home all the time, probably a very new phenomenon. And I suspect an awful lot of them have looked at each other and said, man, this is not working for us. Whether it's just the square footage, or whether it's the configuration, or whether it's now that you got 1, 2, 3 people working from home, do you have enough room for 3 home office setups? I think a lot of people have looked at their living environment and said, yeah, time for something better. And then throw into the mix, it is, as a practical matter, a great time to buy a house because interest rates are so low. You remember, a 1% reduction in interest rates is better for you than a 10% reduction in the home price.
Incredible. From
Substantially
a payment perspective.
Well, yeah, because you're only going to put X% down, but you're going to make your payments every month for a long time. And so net present value it back, you're way better off getting a 1% decrease in your interest rate than you are getting 10, 12, 13% decrease in home price.
Amazing. That's an interesting stuff. Joe, when you look at a macro level interest rates, one of the questions, and I haven't prepared you for this, so I'm sorry, but one of the questions I've wondered is, you look at the Fed funds rate, for example, for the last 20, 30 years, and it's just systematically and progressively gotten lower and lower and lower. We haven't hit negative interest rates in the US yet. We've hit them in other, shall we say, wealthier developed countries. Do you think that trend keeps on going, and where does it go from here? You can't get any lower. What is driving that? And what are your thoughts on where it's going?
Short answer is I do not understand it. And my friends with economics degrees, for the most part, if you get a few cocktails in them, will admit that they don't really understand it. I think part of it is supply and demand for money. You've got a demographic of people who are saving, and all that cash has to go somewhere. And the stock market, I think that's part of what's driving the stock market up, is you've got sort of this yin and yang, right? So with interest rates as low as they are, if you want to make any money, you have to take some risk and put it into equities. On the other hand, not that many people are going to put that much money into the market, relatively speaking, and so you have a bunch of cash sitting around. The repositories of that cash, whether they be money market funds or banks or others, have to do something with it. And the more money you have chasing the lower yielding list of alternatives to invest in, the way you price excess money is you reduce the price of money, and the price of money is interest. And if you do real interest rates, which is, interest less inflation, we've been negative for a while. And so it's really interesting. So traditional economics would say that the Fed's printing money at the rate they're printing money, you should have rampant inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you look back at all the money the Fed's pumped into the system and all the interest rate reductions in the last numbers of years, there's not been inflation. And in fact, it's odd. It doesn't really look like it's triggering inflation this time. And I think part of it is that the money they're putting in is sort of replacing money that otherwise evaporated. So it's not really like M2 is skyrocketing, money supplies are not skyrocketing.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to replenish all the wages and interest and earnings that got evaporated because people aren't doing anything. So that's a lot of words, which tells you nothing more than you knew when you asked me, because I really don't know the answer.
I appreciate the intellectual honesty, because I find it a catch-22. Is it money? Is it a surplus of money seeking a place to go? Or is it the other way around? Is it that the stock market is being propped up by increasingly lower interest rates, systematically for decades now? But let's start looking a little forward into the future, just a little bit. I'm not going to ask you to predict the future, because that's pretty difficult to do. But if you could talk to us about your thoughts about the range of possibilities over the coming 6 to 12 months, the range of possibilities given what used to be an uncertainty range that was like this. I think we're still with a lot of uncertainty, but perhaps it's been, constrained a bit over the last couple of months. What do you think the range of possibilities economically are over the coming 6 to 12 months?
Well, you can actually winnow them in a little bit. I think the Feds are determined to put enough money in that we're not going to go from recession to depression. I think they've sort of made a decision they'll do whatever it takes to avoid that. So you can sort of take a long, deep recession off the table. I think there isn't enough economic activity for a robust, 4% GDP growth kind of a recovery. So I think your range of potential outcomes actually narrows a bit at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
The more interesting question is going to be at the local level, because you could see, within our divisions, you can look and see places where if you were parachuted in, you would barely notice life is different than it was a year ago. And there are places where if you were parachuted in, you'd think we've been invaded by a foreign power and been told to be on lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really goes betwixt and between, both by geography and temporally, right? Because the places that got locked down hardest earliest are some of the most wide open now. So there's a big range of options. I think it's going to be very different by geography. And the other really unfortunate thing that this is highlighting is it's also very different by economic status.
Mm-hmm.
Working at home is fine and dandy if you're a knowledge worker. Working at home doesn't work if you're doing physical labor. Or as I tried to describe one of my job sites, it's very different to telecommute a hammer. Right? If you can figure it out, let me know. But the people who have to be on site have to be on site. People who are driving trucks, people who are working, food service or hospitality, any of those, that part of the economy is getting killed, just killed. And so it's bizarre how badly, you understand why, because of what's causing this, but those parts of the economy are getting creamed. And yet, if you owned Costco stock from a year ago, you're probably very happy.
Absolutely.
Or home builder stock.
Absolutely. Or Netflix or Zoom or
Yeah.
a number of other, absolutely. How has this changed your strategy? Likely in a very abrupt way, but how has this changed your strategy? Or maybe it hasn't.
So it's interesting. There was a great McKinsey study I read a while ago that said dislocations don't create new trends. They take underlying trends that are already in existence and either kill them or turbocharge them. Mm-hmm. And so we've been pushing hard to online and automate and make more virtual all of our sales and decisions, all of our processes for a long time. I would say we made more forward progress in the last 2 months than we did in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Because the resistance that you would get from a consumer who would say, yeah, I don't want to do a virtual tour, I want to show up and see the house. Obviously that resistance evaporated really fast. And so all of a sudden everything can be done virtually. We've sold close to 20% of the last couple months of home sales have been people who have either never been in the same room with a Woodside employee or only very casually and in an almost irrelevant way. Part of it's demographic. You know, I look at my kids who would sit as close as you and I are and probably still text each other rather than talk. That iteration is very comfortable going online, doing a virtual tour, clicking on a bunch of buttons, picking out their finishes, and buying a house. That feels totally normal to them. And in fact, for sort of the younger end of the millennials, this idea that you have to sit in an office and flip through papers and sign them, they perceive that the way you would perceive getting in a horse and buggy. I mean, literally, that's just how crazy they think it is. And yet on the other end, if you're selling homes to people of my generation, to me, the idea of buying a house that I've never stepped foot in is kind of scary. But, you know, if my job was getting relocated or if I was realizing how cramped I was and I needed a new house, given how much better the online tools have gotten, I'd probably do it too. So I think you're going to see those kinds of changes become permanent. I don't think those go away. I think the idea that everybody's working at home goes away, but I think the idea that more people can work at home doesn't go away. So strategy-wise, we probably, I would say our strategy hasn't changed, but our tactics have changed.
Interesting.
To put it in sort of, you know, MBA words, if you will.
Yeah.
Not that I have an MBA. We've just had to alter our tactics, and it's been very successful. And not just us, all the smart, larger builders that can move like that are all doing it. And the buyers are responding, and the brokers are responding. And, you know, there are escrow companies now that have drive-up notaries. You can pull up, hand somebody a document. You know, necessity truly is the mother of invention. So I don't know that any of the trends that we're seeing right now were newly formed out of COVID, but we're certainly seeing things that were happening happen a lot faster.
What about the trend that we hear about with respect to sort of migration out of densely urban areas to potentially suburban and or even rural? Is that something you believe in and or see, or do you think that's short-lived, short-lived given the situation and not likely?
Well, there's a bunch of things driving that, and a lot of them existed pre-COVID. Again, you know, urban areas. So there's the whole new urbanist psyche, which has been saying for 20 years that the suburbs are going to die. I was laughing. I actually saw a book on my shelf this morning called The End of the Suburbs. It was written in the mid-'80s, and there were a lot of very intelligent people with lots of alphabets after their names saying the suburbs are doomed. Everyone's going to live in a city. The problem with that was that the people who wrote those books, for the most part, lived in Boston, Chicago, and New York, and just didn't understand how other people lived. There was a very geographic-centric bent on who was writing all those books, and I never believed it. And I got laughed at a few times speaking publicly, saying it's just not going to happen. But it didn't happen, and in fact, the trend was reversing even before this, just because of cost. I mean, the cost per square foot in an urban area can be 3, 4, 10x the cost of the same living in a suburban area. And so, I mean, geez, the price of a basic little townhome, little condo flat in New York is 4 times the price of a nice big house in Salt Lake.
Absolutely.
So you know, economics drives a lot of it. The other thing the new urbanists forgot in all that everyone's going to live downtown is it's really expensive to build up, right? The price difference per square foot between building a 10-story high-rise and a 2-story wood frame building is 5, 6, 7x. I mean, it's not structural. It's crazy more expensive. And it's a different type of construction. You need different trades, and there's politics of getting those buildings built in the inner areas. And so there's a whole lot of very good economic reasons why that wasn't happening. But the other thing that got missed was they're like, oh, all the millennials are going to want to live in urban areas. And I go, yeah, all the millennials are going to want to live in urban areas when they're 20 years old and want to go out to bars and walk home. When they're 30-year-olds and have 2 kids and need to find a place for them to go to school and a place to walk the dog, an awful lot of them are going to go to suburbs, which was just sort of logical to anybody who really looked at it, and which in fact happened.
Absolutely.
I think, again, to the not creating a new trend, but turbocharging an existing trend, after the pandemic, you after the flu pandemic in the early 1900s, people fled big city for safety reasons. And there will be a certain number of people who do that now. But again, let's not get stuck thinking about the future from the perspective of only today. If a year from today, you're getting your COVID shot along with your annual flu shot every November, that argument kind of goes away.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. We'll see.
I have a feeling we're going to ask you to come back, Joe, because we could sit here and talk for another hour about this. And despite the many conversations you and I have every single time we have a chat, I learned something new. I'm really grateful for your time.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Melissa.
Sure. No, that's been great. Thank you both. Thank you, Joel, for being here. Thank you to those of you who've joined us online today. I didn't have any questions in the chat. Now's your chance. Throw up a question or two for Joel if you like. But otherwise, we've enjoyed pivoting with our discussions. I think this is going to be really interesting to hear how people are coming out the other side of this, right? And how we're thinking about where the world's going to go in home building in the next year, 6 months, 3 months, 3 years. Good. Oh, here, quick. See, I knew if I paused long enough. Love the Zoom. There we go. That was it. Thank you, Ernest. Appreciate your feedback. Oh, here we go. One more. What is this one? Bear with me. Let's see. Joel's thoughts on single-family rental market. That was the question. Not really a question. What are your thoughts on where that market's headed?
Yes. So the single-family rental market's a funny topic because everybody asks about it today like it's a brand new discovery. There's 13 or 14 million single-family rentals. It has been there forever. It's always been a big part. The big publicly traded companies that you read about, if you add them all up, are still a pretty small percentage of that. So, you know, there are people who want to live in a house who don't want to own a house, and there will always be those people. And I think that it's a nice business. There are parts of the country that are probably already overbuilt with single-family rentals, and there are parts of the country that probably could use a whole bunch more right now, because I do think that if we stay in the condition we're in for a while and people want to leave cities and they don't have a down payment or a FICO score to buy, they're going to want to go into the suburbs and rent. So I think it's a good business. But you got to be very careful where you are, and you have to watch the relationship between what homes are renting for and what they're selling for. Because low interest rates make mortgage payments very low, especially when you compare them to rental payments.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, that's the last of the questions for the moment. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. We appreciate it. There will be a recording of today's webinar. We'll send it out for everyone to follow up. And we'll do another one in another week or so.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
All right.